Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Shalom, Salem, Archival Stories from the Jewish Community of Salem, Massachusetts. My name is Ginevra Morse, Vice President of Education and Programming at American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society. I will be your moderator for today's program. This webinar is hosted by the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center at New England Historic Genealogical Society and brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. We are very excited to be offering this presentation as part of the inaugural Salem Ancestry Days. So today we will hear about just some of the families, businesses, and synagogues that make up Salem's Jewish history, using the archival collections at the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center as a guide. We will look at photographs and ephemera that highlight the contributions of the city's Jewish community. Our presenter today is Stephanie Call, Associate Director of Archives and Education. Stephanie has been with the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center since 2007. She is responsible for overseeing the JHC archival collections, creating educational programming and content, and conducting outreach. She earned a BA in English and Jewish Studies from Mount Holyoke College and an MS in Library and Information Science with a concentration in archives management from Simmons College. She is a member of the Society of American Archivists and the New England Archivists. At any point during the presentation, feel free to type your question into the panel to the right of your screen. And we also invite you to share stories of your family's connection to Salem's Jewish history in that questions or chat panel. And I do want to note that we are broadcasting from our homes to your home with various limitations and distractions. We apologize in advance if there are any interruptions from our end, and we thank you for your patience. But we are recording this event, and starting tomorrow, you can freely go back and review any of the content from this presentation on our website and on our YouTube channel. All right, so without further ado, please welcome Stephanie Call.
Thanks, Ginevra, for that introduction, and I'm happy to be with all of you today to talk about Salem's Jewish history as seen through our archives. For those of you who are new to us, the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center at New England Historic Genealogical Society is a destination for exploring and preserving the histories of Jewish families and institutions in New England and beyond. We do this through our archival work, educational programs and exhibits, and public events. Our physical location is on Newbury Street in Boston, but you can find us online at jewishheritagecenter.org. Formerly known as the New England Archive of the American Jewish Historical Society, the Jewish Heritage Center formalized a collaboration with NEHGS in 2015 with a strengthened mission to enhance Jewish historical and genealogical research and to be a premier site for collection and preservation of Jewish history. In 2018, the center was named for Justin and Genevieve Wyner in recognition of their longstanding support and advocacy. And for the purpose of this webinar, I'm just going to refer to us as the Jewish Heritage Center or the JHC. Today, I'll be talking about Salem's Jewish community and showcasing items specifically from our archives with a few outside sources for illustration purposes. But I do want to acknowledge that it's sometimes difficult to talk about one North Shore community without talking about more of them. So I will mention briefly Peabody, Lynn, and Beverly, but I'm mostly going to be discussing Salem today. So just a little bit of history about our Salem materials. In 2014, and not to be confusing, the Jewish Heritage Center of the North Shore moved and due to space constraints decided to donate about half of their collections to us to process and eventually digitize and make them available online. Then in early 2017, the Jewish Heritage Center of the North Shore closed and they donated their remaining archives to the JHC. These collections are really a treasure trove for us. They tell multiple stories of Jewish families, businesses, organizations, and synagogues in the North Shore area of Massachusetts. And we really love that we have them here. They do remain, however, a work in progress. So we anticipate finding additional materials pertaining to Salem's Jewish history as we continue to process the collections and make them available for people to research. And I again want to reiterate what Ginevra said at the beginning and take the opportunity now to invite those of you listening today to share your stories in the chat, if you have them, about Salem's Jewish community. And also ask you to consider donating any papers or records you have about this community to our archives. And at the end of this presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about that donation process and also share your stories. So Salem was the name given to the area by settlers in 1626. It was also known as Namkeag, which was named for the people of the Massachusetts who lived in the area. The word means fishing place, which is certainly apt for this coastal land. But the name Salem, of course, was taken from Jerusalem. Salem is a form of shalom, or peace. There's some indication that there were Sephardic Jews from Spain and Portugal in the area in the late 1600s, but by the mid to late 1800s, the Jewish population of Salem was mostly comprised of Jews from Eastern Europe and Germany of Ashkenazi descent. By the turn of the 20th century, we see two Salem neighborhoods that are primarily settled by Jews. This is the first one, the Derby-Essex Street area, and the Boston Street area is the second one that borders Peabody. The Boston Street Jews were mostly of Sephardic descent, and they met at an informal shul at 165 Boston Street in Salem. So although we do tend to think of this area as primarily settled by Eastern European Jews of Ashkenazi descent, Sephardic Jews also settled briefly in Salem, beginning in large part in 1911 with the Jewish families from Constantinople, now Istanbul. These families initially settled in the Castle Hill area of Salem and held Friday night services in homes when they had a minyan of 10 men to conduct the Orthodox service. This immigration of Turkish Jews in the early 20th century can be attributed to a combination of events and social issues, including the Balkan Wars, the 1908 Young Turk Revolution, military conscription, and poverty. However, it was mostly an economic decision, as Turkish Jews, inspired by the idea of a more prosperous life in the US, immigrated to this country. Many of these immigrants were already trained craftsmen and worked as shoemakers or leather tradesmen, and they settled in Peabody near the leather factories, and in 1922 founded the Sephardic congregation Tifereth Israel. So although ultimately I think the story of Sephardic Jews on the North Shore is a significant one for Peabody, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that there was this community of Sephardic Jews in Salem in the early 20th century. And this is a photograph of Tifereth Israel on Pierpoint Street in Peabody. So I will begin this history of Jewish Salem with the Wyner family. Max Weiner was born on April 15, 1862, to Maurice and Rebecca Vedoklevsky in Kovno, Lithuania. He was the third in a family of 6 children. At the age of 21, in 1883, he married Bluma Dembo, and shortly thereafter immigrated to the US to establish a new life for himself and his bride. Max arrived in New York and changed his last name to Wyner, and after doing that, traveled to Boston, where he lived with Bluma's cousin Rose and her husband Harris Goodman. Around 1885, Max moved to Salem and he became a peddler of dry goods in towns to the north of Salem, which included Ipswich, Beverly, Danvers, and Middleton. As he became more prosperous, he was able to purchase a horse and buggy for his travels, which was probably a relief to him by that time. Also in 1885, Bluma arrived in the US to join Max. And at the time of Max and Bluma's arrival in Salem, there really wasn't an organized Jewish community there, meaning there was no established permanent synagogue. Max and Bluma first lived on Mill Street and then North Street, where Max's brothers Jacob, Haskell, and Nathan also lived. Eventually, other members of Max's family joined them in the US. Max and Bluma also started their own family around this time, and they had 3 children. Rose, who was born in 1887, Meyer, born in 1890, and Lewis, who was born in 1891, the same year that Max became an American citizen. In 1895, Max founded the New England Supply Company, which was located on Essex Street, and the building that is currently, I believe, the YMCA for people who are local to the area. And here we have a photograph of that early store, and we can see Max in the rear of the photo to the right, and a young Meyer on the left. I don't know who the gentleman is in the forefront there. Max was not the first Jewish retailer in Salem, but he was among the first that stayed in the city. William Filene, founder of the eponymous store Filene's, had opened his store on Essex Street in 1856, and he lived in Salem until 1861 when he moved to Boston. David Conrad also had a ladies' goods store on Essex Street, founded in 1866, but he also later moved to Boston. And here we have an advertisement in a 1911 Salem City Directory for Max Weiner's clothing store. And by 1919, the business name had been changed to Wyner Specialty Shop, but this is when Max had to unfortunately close the business. On the right is the advertisement in the paper for his closeout sale, where it stated the store has to vacate and everything is going to be sold at very low prices. Max's son Meyer was a violinist and dentist and graduated from Harvard Dental School in 1912. This is a photo of his first office in Salem. Louis Wyner became a lawyer and graduated from Boston University Law School in 1914. And daughter Rose became a buyer of women's clothing and also took over her father's dress business. She later married Bernard Gould. Much of what we have in the collections about Salem is due in large part to Richard Wyner, who was Meyer's son and Max's grandson. Richard was an avid genealogist who donated several photographs, documents, and ephemera to the Jewish Heritage Center of the North Shore, where, of course, they ended up here at the JHC. And here's just a triptych of photographs of Meyer Wyner with his violin at various ages. I just love the fact that we have this progression of violinist photographs of Meyer. He played throughout his lifetime, and in 1940 performed with the Doctors Symphony Orchestra at Jordan Hall. Max Weiner was instrumental in the founding of Salem's first permanent synagogue on the North Shore, the Orthodox Congregation Sons of Jacob, and on July 28, 1898, at a meeting with 41 people, was elected the congregation's first president. Services were held in a variety of rented spaces, including the Odell Building on Washington Street and the second floor of the Salem 5-Cents Bank. On October 3, 1898, the founders began to work towards obtaining a charter from the state and hired lawyer Henry P. Moulton to assist them. The charter was granted to Moulton on October 21st, and Moulton later administered the oath of office to officers of the congregation on November 26th. On December 29th, the charter was issued for the congregation to operate as a religious corporation. And this is the date that Temple Shalom acknowledged as its founding date. And Temple Shalom is Congregation Sons of Jacob. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Other names on the charter, in addition to Max Weiner, are Aaron Narkunsky, Nathan Harris, Haskell Wyner, Max Pommier, Samuel Berenstein, and Simon Goldstein, and others. That's actually what it says. Max was also responsible for the purchase of land on Buxton Road in Danvers in 1899 for the Shoals Cemetery. And in 1903, Congregation Sons of Jacob purchased this building seen here, the Calvary Baptist Church, which was at the corner of Essex and Herbert Streets, for the synagogue. Since the congregation was Orthodox, the church required some initial modifications, which included installing a balcony for women congregants. Eastern European Jewish immigrants began to settle in Salem in larger numbers in the early 20th century. And by 1920, there were over 400 families that made up Salem's Jewish community. Sarah Posner wrote this lovely tribute that describes the building on Essex Street that we just saw. And she wrote, "My personal childhood memories of the old shul on Essex Street remain vivid. I remember an austere wooden building, its wide staircase leading directly to a cobblestone street. The interior of the structure was without ornamentation, so that its focal point became the Holy Ark. Services were almost completely in Hebrew, and the decorum was not always reverent, so that at times Shalom Aleichem would have felt at home in this transplanted East European setting, where prayer was frequently punctuated by Yiddish conversation. After the Essex Street building was purchased, Joseph Jacobson served as rabbi of the congregation for several years. And as the Jewish population of Salem grew, so did the congregation's membership. A brotherhood, Hebrew school, and junior congregation that held its own Shabbat services were established. Numerous alterations were made to the church building, which enabled the congregation to utilize that space for 49 years, even as the vestry of that building was used for triple duty as school, meeting space, and social hall. In 1936, Max Goldberg purchased the site at the corner of Lafayette and Ocean for the Jewish Community Center, where it was located for 16 years. During World War II, the Jewish Community Center was used by a number of civic groups, including the Red Cross and Civil Defense. And here we have a photograph of volunteers for the Red Cross in 1941. And in 1940, Congregation Sons of Jacob purchased real estate adjacent to the community center, which would later be useful as the synagogue continued to grow. In addition to a brotherhood, Congregation Sons of Jacob, of course, formed a sisterhood as well in 1931, and that's the group we see here in this photograph. After World War II, there are two significant shifts that impact the history of Congregation Sons of Jacob. The Jewish population of Salem began to move away from the Derby Street neighborhood to South Salem, and the congregation also welcomed Abraham Kazis as their first conservative rabbi in 1947. So this shifts the congregation away from its Orthodox roots and becomes affiliated with the conservative United Synagogue of America. A major fundraising campaign also allowed the congregation to build a new synagogue on Lafayette Street. And on December 12, 1952, the new building is dedicated and the congregation is renamed Temple Shalom. And here we just have a photograph of the Cornerstone Ceremony in 1951. We have Cantor Irving Ackerman, David Fry, Rabbi Kazis, and Joseph Wineapple in this photo. One person pivotal to Temple Shalom and whom we saw in the previous photo was Irving Ackerman, who served as Cantor Ritual Director and teacher at Temple Shalom for 50 years. Irving was born in 1909 in Czernowitz, Austria, which became part of Romania after World War I, and became a member of the Shamrim Jewish youth group in his teens and immigrated to Palestine in 1934. He married his childhood sweetheart, Amelie Molly Isaacson, and came to the US for medical treatment after he lost his legs to a circulatory condition. Irving and Molly settled on Hersey Street in Salem and had two daughters, Yara and Dorothy. Salem was most likely the chosen destination for the couple because Molly's brother, Morris Isaacson, was already established in Salem with his own leather factory. Irving soon became friendly with Temple Shalom's rabbi, Abraham Kazis, and this rabbi recommended that Irving study for the cantorate, which he did, and he served at Temple Shalom from 1950 to 1992. And here we have a photo of Temple Shalom on Lafayette Street. In the mid to late 1950s, Temple Shalom boasted 450 families as members, and the estimated Jewish population of Salem was somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 people. So we can guess that at least half of Salem's Jewish population were members of Temple Shalom actively. When Samuel Zoll ran for mayor in 1969, he estimated that the Jewish population of the city at that time was about 400 people, or about 10% of the total population. So although these numbers are anecdotal, they do reflect a decline in the population as Jewish individuals are either moving out of Salem or simply just becoming unaffiliated with the synagogue. And in this undated photograph, we see the interior of Temple Shalom set up for a wedding, and we see the chuppah up at the front. I just think it's a nice image to share. In the early 2000s, membership of Temple Shalom was in a steady decline. It eventually dropped to 80 families. In 2014, leaders of Temple Shalom and Bene Abraham in neighboring Beverly decided to merge. And Temple Shalom ended up closing in 2014, which is a story that's repeated in numerous towns and cities as membership to synagogues drop. The closing of Temple Shalom also meant that there's no longer an active synagogue in Salem. And this is a photograph from the 1961 groundbreaking of Bene Abraham on Lothrop Street in Beverly. So we do have several photographs of early members of the Jewish community of Salem, and for the most part, they all seem to have some connection to Max Weiner's family, but otherwise we don't know that much about them or any of their descendants. So I again invite those of you listening to share what you know, if any of these people are recognizable to you, as I introduce them. So here we have Eva and Philip Pesach Cohen. Eva owned Eva's Hat Shop on Central Street in Salem. So she was a women business owner. Philip was married to Max Weiner's sister Dobra, and Eva was their daughter. On the left here, we have Barney, Anna, and Harold Rakow. Harold grew up to own a pharmacy. And on the right, we have Sarah Wyner and Max Aronson. Sarah Wyner was one of Haskell and Hannah Weiner's daughters, so she's a niece of Max Weiner. Here we have Morris Goodman in 1910 and Ida Goodman in 1912. It's possible that these Goodmans are related to Harris and Rose Goodman, the in-laws that Max Weiner initially lived with upon arriving in the US, but I don't know for certain. So again, I invite anyone who might know of these Goodmans to feel free to share that information. Samuel Kerr was Max Weiner's nephew from Max's sister Hannah. Although Hannah chose to stay in Kovno, Max was able to help her two sons, Samuel and Joseph, as well as a daughter, Rose, immigrate to the US. Samuel and Joseph lived with Max in Bluma for a bit and later founded a furniture store that they called the Blue Front, which perhaps was too esoteric of a name, so they later renamed it the more obvious National House of Furnishings. And this is the Friedman family. We have Rose Friedman holding the infant. And she, of course, was the aforementioned sister to Sam and Joseph Kerr and a niece of Max Weiner. Her husband Hiram and their children, Anne, Eva, Bess, and Alex, are also in this photograph. Alex later ran a hardware store on Front Street in Salem. And here we have the Chandler family, who, according to the note on the back of the photograph, is one of the oldest Jewish families in Salem. Edith Chandler was also a daughter of Haskell and Hannah Weiner, and therefore Max Weiner's niece. And finally, we have Max Gordon in this photo with bakers from Miller's Bakery in 1915. I'm not aware of Miller's Bakery being owned by Max Gordon, so if anyone knows about this mysterious photograph again, please, information would be great. Axelrod, however, is an important name in the Salem community. Brothers Benjamin and Sam Axelrod were born in Russia and came to Salem in 1905, where they found work as peddlers. In 1913, they founded the Empire Clothing Company store in Salem, which eventually grew to a small chain of 23 local stores in Salem, Gloucester, Lawrence, Liberty Tree Mall in Danvers, and Portland, Maine. The last Empire store was in Gloucester and closed in 1997. Founding members of Congregation Sons of Jacob, both Ben and Sam later served as president of Temple Shalom, and Sam also served as treasurer of the congregation. Sam and his wife Fanny lived on Lafayette Street. Known as the Dean of Merchants, Sam led advocacy efforts for off-street parking in downtown Salem. Ben and his wife Bertha had 3 sons, Frederick, Leonard, and Donald. In 1960, both Ben and Sam were honored by Salem for their philanthropy. Sam died in 1961 and Benjamin in 1964. This program from Temple Shalom honored Ben Axelrod's commitment to the congregation as seen through his work with multiple committees, including fundraising, the religious school, program, and cemetery committees. Ben's son Leonard and his wife Henrietta Penny Axelrod and their son Joseph were also honored in 1994 by Salem Hospital for 3 generations of philanthropic giving. The main building at the hospital was also named the Axelrod Building at this time. Leonard Axelrod was an associate with Empire Clothing Company and became a trustee of Salem Hospital in 1967, where he served as chairman from 1976 to 1982 and was elected trustee emeritus following in his Uncle Sam's footsteps of philanthropy with the hospital. So although we don't have anything in our archives specifically pertaining to the Salem Fire of 1914, I do feel it would be remiss not to mention it at all, as it was a significant event in Salem's history. It's unknown how many Jewish families were impacted by this event, but given the location and the industry that it impacted, it's very likely that many lost their homes or jobs. The fire started with an explosion at the corn factory at 57 Boston Street and quickly spread to neighboring factories and towards downtown Salem. The corn factory was a leather factory owned by Max Corn, who became one of Peabody's earliest tannery operators when he moved his factory to Walnut Street, also in 1914. And I would again be interested in knowing more about how this event specifically impacted the Jewish community of Salem, and do welcome your stories if you have them. This is a postcard from the collections, and despite the image of the ruins of the Corn Leather Company, the handwritten note on the reverse has nothing to do with this event or the corn factory. It's actually used as a thank you note for a gift, which I thought was sort of amusing. Kernwood Country Club, founded in 1914, was established by a group of Jewish business leaders in response to exclusionary practices against Jews from other local clubs. Louis Kirstein at Filene's, Joe Liebman, Jesse Koshland, and Al Kaffenberg led negotiations to purchase the land and former home of Colonel Francis Peabody, which he named Kernwood, and this land and house became the new Jewish Country Club. I was surprised to find this article from the Boston Evening Transcript in our Rachesky papers, where prominent banker and philanthropist A.C. Rachesky is actually named as one of the buyers. In this very strange article, there's a fascinating bit about the mansion being partly out of George Eliot's novel Daniel Deronda, with a quote, "Zionist ending abruptly localized," end quote. For those of you not up on your Victorian novels, Daniel Deronda is unusual in that it includes Jewish characters and a storyline that's sympathetic and unprejudiced towards Jews, unlike other novels of the time. This is the only indication in the article of the future use of the grounds and mansion for a Jewish country club. The golf course was designed by architect Donald Ross and was originally named the Elm Hill Country Club. Louis Kirstein served as the club's first president from 1914 to 1918, and although the course only had 6 holes available for play when it opened, it quickly grew and became a well-loved destination for prominent Jewish residents looking to socialize and play golf in a welcoming atmosphere. The tercentenary of Salem was celebrated for 3 days in July 1926, and the Jewish community took part in the festivities with a dinner featuring Alexander Bryn, then editor of Boston's Jewish Advocate newspaper. The Toastmaster was Joseph L. Simon, who was at the time, and I quote from the Jewish Advocate, one of the leading citizens of Salem and probably the most prominent members of the Jewish people of the city. Aside from Simon and Bryn, the event featured a wide variety of speakers on the early history of Salem, including a descendant of Roger Conant and Thomas Gardner of the Old Planters. However, it was Bryn's speech on the contribution of the Jew in American civilization that was the highlight of the evening. One of several Jewish businesses and community members participating in the parade was J. Rooks Furrier. The Rooks Company was a women's fashion retailer on the North Shore, and at one point there were 11 stores in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So just to give people an idea, this is just a sampling of the many businesses owned by Jewish individuals in Salem. This is a list of mostly retailers with some service shops, and it doesn't include all businesses, but this is quite an extensive list of places. During the 1930s and 1940s, Salem was a shopping destination for many outside of the area. Salem was also a transportation hub, and a number of clothing and millinery stores lined Essex, Central, and Lafayette streets. At one time, it was very easy to take a train and get to downtown Salem to do your shopping. However, during the 40s and into the 50s, a construction project to fix an often congested railroad grade crossing ended up creating a traffic situation that made it challenging and unbearable enough that people stopped going to the shops. Judge Samuel Zoll referred to this particular construction project as Salem's version of the Big Dig, for those of you familiar with Boston's infamous Big Dig construction project. Store owners closed their shops or moved them. And in the 1950s, the shopping center in Peabody opened, which led to more locally owned shops in Salem closing as well. And these photos are not originals from these collections. I believe they were used in an exhibit that the Jewish Heritage Center of the North Shore did. But they do show two businesses that were well established in their heyday. One being Sushel's Deli on Central Street near Front, and Empire, which, as I mentioned previously, was owned by the Axelrod family. In the late 1800s, Salem was a Republican town. In 1867, David Conrad of Ladies' Goods Stores served on the board of aldermen. And in the early 20th century, the previously mentioned J.L. Simon served as chairman of the Salem Republican Committee during the Taft administration between 1909 and 1913. Perhaps, though, the most well-known Jewish political figure from Salem is Democrat Samuel Zoll. Zoll's father, Joseph, was an immigrant from Lithuania, arriving in the US in 1909. After working in leather factories in Salem, he started the J.M. Leather Company on Main Street in Peabody. He later went into the shoe industry and with other partners started the shoe factory Gamblers in Lynn, where they made women's shoes. Although Samuel was born in Peabody in 1934, the family moved to Salem when he was a child. In 1957, he was elected to Salem City Council and became council president in 1958. Later, after serving as a state representative from 1965 to 1969, he was elected mayor of Salem and served from 1970 to 73. He was then appointed district court judge and later Chief Justice Massachusetts District Courts. Upon his retirement as a judge, he was appointed to the state's Joint Labor Management Committee for Public Safety. And in a 2009 oral history interview, Zoll recounts what it was like growing up in his neighborhood in North Salem, which was next to Peabody near St. Mary's Cemetery on Route 114, just to give all of you a little bit of a marker. Zoll's description is indicative of the Jewish community's expanding opportunities in Salem and further illustrates the move away from what was considered the Jewish neighborhood in Salem down near Derby and Essex streets. And Zoll says, "We lived in North Salem. There were about, maybe at any one time, there were maybe 20 Jewish families. Very few Jewish families in that area. And that was a mix. It was primarily Irish American, but a lot of Polish people, Greek people were brought up in a kind of mix. My mother, several of my mother's girlfriends used to say, 'How are you going to bring the boys up in this place? There are no Yiddish kind here.' And you know, my mother said, 'This place will always be the strength of my boys.' And so we grew up there." The Jewish Federation of the North Shore was founded in Lynn in 1938 and modeled after what is now called the Combined Jewish Philanthropies, a federated charity founded in Boston in 1895. The Jewish Federation of the North Shore eventually moved to East India Square in Salem, and in 2013 merged with the Combined Jewish Philanthropies, the very organization it was modeled on. Today, the offices of the North Shore Federation are in Marblehead. And Senator Ed Markey is well known for wearing sneakers when he's out and about, so I do sort of wonder if he was wearing sneakers in this photograph here. In October 1980, the Federation presented then Congressman Markey with a plaque in appreciation of his service in securing the release of Soviet Jews. One of the many initiatives to come out of the Federation is the Jewish Journal. Founded in 1977 with a $20,000 grant from the Federation, the idea for the paper stemmed from a retreat sponsored by the Federation in 1974 as a young leadership program, where a group of people from the North Shore envisioned a community newspaper to chronicle North Shore Jewish communities. This was an annual retreat to encourage local leadership from various North Shore towns, including Danvers, Peabody, Linfield, Swampscott, and Marblehead. And at this particular retreat, Dr. Bernard Reisman from Brandeis was the facilitator. And the result of the numerous discussions was this idea for a Jewish community newspaper. A grassroots committee began to learn the ropes of the newspaper publishing business, and in January 1977, the first issue was published as the Journal of the North Shore Jewish Community. The first editor of the paper, Jean Lichtenstein, was supported by a mostly volunteer crew and business manager Judy Meltzer, who we see on this photo on the right. They worked out of the carriage house of an old mansion in Swampscott originally. After some growing pains in 1978, the paper was in search of a new editor, and production was moved to the basement of the home of Gerald and Sarah Posner, the couple you see here on the left. Although the paper's focus has changed since its founding, the purpose has always been to inform and connect the North Shore Jews to one another and their communities. In 1995, Gerald Posner was appointed publisher of the newspaper, a position he served in until his retirement at the age of 80 in 2002. The paper changed its name in 1995 to the Jewish Journal north of Boston. With the end of run of Boston's Jewish Advocate, the Journal is the only Jewish newspaper in this area that is still running. The story of Salem's Jewish community remains a vital and important part of Salem's history beyond what we know of the witch trials and maritime history. And I hope today has illuminated some of these people and places that make up the city's vibrant history. If you would like to know more about the collections we have in our archives that relate not just to Salem, but the North Shore area, you can visit our website at jewishheritagecenter.org, where you can find a list of our finding aids and information on how to access our digitized collections. And this is the direct URL for our collections in the digital library and archives. We have a few collections that are open access, meaning you don't need to log in to view them, including the Rocheski papers, which do have some materials pertaining to the North Shore. But most of our collections do require signing up for a free guest user account with AmericanAncestors.org. You can learn more about accessing these collections on this site or on our website. And here is the landing page for the collections we've digitized from the North Shore Jewish Heritage Center. Once again, as a reminder, not everything has been made available digitally yet. It does continue to be a work in progress, but we do have 15 collections that have been digitized, including 2 that I spoke about today, the Richard Wyner family papers and the records of Congregation Sons of Jacob Temple Shalom. And these collections do, again, require an account to log in. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, and just another reminder, we're still very much in the process of organizing these collections. So we do hope to find more Salem Jewish stories in what has yet to be processed. But I do want to encourage those of you listening today with ties to the Salem Jewish community to consider donating your family papers to the JHC, including any business or organizational records you have. And we would love to know more about these families mentioned today, as well as those I did not mention, because they're not in our archive. So if you're interested in learning more, please contact us by emailing jhcreference@nehgs.org, and a member of our staff will get back to you. And I think before we move on to questions, just another reminder, you can put your story in the chat box, and if we have time, we'll share some of those as well.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for that great presentation. And again, before we get to your questions and stories, I would like to tell you about a few upcoming programs. So if you liked today's session, do consider joining us this coming Thursday, May 6th, when Stephanie will highlight several diaries in our collections and why and how they are important to our understanding of and connecting with the past. On May 13th, our curator of special collections, Kurt DiCamillo, will share the story of Jewish families and their English country houses, guiding us through several homes and collections. And then on May 27th, Lindsay Murphy will present on how to use the collections of the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center in your own family history research. So all of these programs are online. They are free and they are open to the public, and they will also be recorded and made available on our website. So if you're interested in these programs or to see what else we have coming up, please go to americanancestors.org/education/online-classes. All right, so let's get to some of your questions and other stories and other notes that you like to share. Again, go ahead and type them into the questions panel. So Stephanie, I know that you received one story by email prior to this. Would you like to share some of that now?
Sure. So we received this email from Rachel Needleman Spector. So thank you, Rachel. She wrote, "My mother, Frida Friedman Needleman, was born in Salem in 1907, the youngest of 11 children. Her parents moved to Salem from Utica, New York in the 1880s. My grandfather was a tailor and a founding member of Congregation Sons of Jacob. I remember the shul that was on Essex Street. When I was 10, the congregation moved to Lafayette Street and was renamed Temple Shalom. Sadly, it no longer exists. As a child, I attended Hebrew school and then confirmation classes with Rabbi Abraham Kazis. There were not a lot of Jewish children as I grew up, but the few of us stuck together. As teens, we went to dances and other activities in Marblehead, Swampscott, and Lynn. The most compelling event and story of my mother's youth was the Salem Fire. The family lived on Crombie Street, and their home was one of the many buildings that was destroyed. They moved to Eden Street, and she lived there until she went to college. She was one of the few women of her day to attend Radcliffe College. She married my father in 1934, and I arrived in 1940. So thank you again, Rachel, for sharing your Salem story with us. Do we have any others in the chat or questions?
Yeah, just a few comments. Mark says that his uncle worked at the Empire Clothing Store in Lynn, both in the Salem and Lynn stores, so a nice connection there.
Fantastic.
He also says the Posners were his parents' neighbors.
Great.
So that's fun. Let's see. Allison says, as a student at Endicott Junior College from 1974 to 76, I would attend services at Temple Bene Abraham. And Jennifer says, my husband's family, Shore, ran Shaw's Eggs and Poultry. The Shore family immigrated from Latvia, settling first in Michigan and later in the mid-1920s in Salem.
Perfect. Great. Yes, I did see mention of Shaw's Eggs and Poultry, and for a second I thought maybe there was a connection to the grocery store, but there is not. Correct? Maybe Jennifer can clarify that, but I don't believe that there's a connection there.
And Harriet noted that Louis Axelrod was her great uncle. So lots of great connections and family connections to the content that you presented today. So thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, everyone, for sharing that. And if you have, as Stephanie mentioned, if you have more information or more stories that you want to share, maybe you knew everyone in a photograph that we shared today and you could help us identify some of those folks, certainly reach out to us at jhcreference@nehgs.org. So a few other questions. David asks, when did the family change the spelling of the name Wyner, so W-I-N-E-R, to Wyner with a Y? Do you know?
I don't think they did. The Wyners, Max Weiner changed his name from, and I'm going to mess it up without looking at it, but his original name was not Wyner at all. It was Vedoklevsky, and he changed to Wyner with an I. Wyner's with a why. As in the Wyner family, Jewish Heritage Center are two different families. So they're not the same family.
Tom, oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's very confusing talking about all these Wyners.
Yes. Tom also says, my great uncle Clarence Friedman lived in Salem for more than 40 years and had an insurance agency there, and he was married to a Newmark. So another nice connection. Lawrence says, my mother was Sarah Posner, nee Lysak. My grandfather, Isaac Lysak, was a carpenter. He remodeled a barn on Oliver Street in the 50s to be a home for Rabbi Kaziz. So lots of great connections. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, thank you.
Let's see, some other questions here. Rachel asks, how did Salem's Jewish population interact with other groups in the city?
Well, I don't think there was too much, there was no real separation. I think that they worked together in the factories, early on. They, they went to secular school together. So I think that it was fairly well integrated. I don't think that there was a lot of differentiation between the groups. Not that I've been able to pick up based on, Samuel Zoll's oral history. It seemed like, as he said, there was a lot of mixing going on in his neighborhood. So I think that the further from the Derby Street area that you went out into Salem, into sort of more of those suburban areas, there was definitely more integration between other groups. And, in terms of, if there was any anti-Semitism or anything, I'm not really sure. I haven't been able to really isolate any of that. So it's not much of an answer, but
all right. And
best I have.
And so Mark asks, did the congregation of Temple Shalom go from Orthodox to conservative?
It did, yes, in the 50s.
Okay. Let's see, another story to share. Robert says, Friedman Hardware was actually called Salem Hardware. My father, Louis Friedman, unrelated, had another store on Front Street. Essex Supply Company opened around 1939 and it closed in 1964. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Let's see. Sorry, I'm just reading some of the comments here. Francis says, not a question, but a comment on the picture of papers and a well-worn envelope. Some folks feel that making a donation of family papers must be in pristine condition, but this envelope had a life of all its own. There are notations, etc., written on it. So maybe could you talk a little bit about, if people are interested or thinking about donating papers to us or to another repository, do they have to be in kind of mint condition?
Oh, no, absolutely not. We get a lot of papers and photographs that are in, quite frankly, terrible condition. We're very lucky to have a conservator on staff, Todd Pattison, who's amazing and does fantastic work. So we are able to save a lot of documents with some of his preservation techniques. Actually, that newspaper advertisement of Max Weiner's store going out of business, when that came to us, it was in really terrible condition and really fragile. It was in a plastic sleeve that was just sort of making the newspaper even more brittle. And Todd was able to sort of rescue it and put it in a more stable environment for us. And, so now we have a much more stable newspaper article of this, this advertisement. So definitely don't worry about things being in pristine condition. I mean, we can't take things that are, for lack of a better term, been eaten by rodents or bugs. That generally can be a problem, but for the most part, or if it's, seriously mold covered, those are problematic things. But for the most part, if it's wrinkled, if it's a little bit torn, if it's a panoramic photograph that's been rolled up for several years, we're able to do things with those materials to make them available for people to look at.
And again, if folks do have materials that they're thinking about donating, what's the best next step?
So the best next step is to email us at this email address that is on your screen, jhcreference@nehgs.org, and someone on our staff will get back to you. The more information you can include in that initial email, the easier it is for us to sort of help you determine next steps with us.
And Rachel asks, what kinds of family or business papers do you accept?
So we accept a wide variety of family papers, photographs. We've had sort of handwritten or amateur memoirs donated, family trees, diaries, of course, which I'm talking about in a few days. We've had school records donated to us, report cards and papers that people wrote when they were in 4th grade, which are always kind of fun. Business records, financial ledgers for organizations, membership ledgers. We would also love, examples of receipts from those businesses that might have logos or training materials or, anything that were given to employees at the store when they started. So basically anything that would sort of paint a picture for a researcher of what the family day-to-day was like or what the business day-to-day was like, those are the things that we would be interested in collecting.
Great, thank you. And a few more stories. Robert says, at the time of the Salem Fire, my grandparents, Abraham and Bessie Friedman, lived on Perkins Street. The fire burned out their area, and they and their kids temporarily lived on the Common. Then they moved to Bridge Street and later to Herbert Street.
I saw some of those photos of people on the Common. That was pretty incredible in the tents. So thank you.
Wow.
For sharing that.
Beryl says, my grandfather, Israel Porter, was a fireman, a barber, and sold insurance in the early part of the 20th century. Unfortunately, he passed away in his 40s in 1936. He and his wife, Goldie, lived in Salem and had 3 daughters, including my mother, Doris Cohen, Florence Cooperstein, and Sheila Goldstein. So lots of family connections to Salem.
Yes, great. Thank you.
So I think that's just about all the questions. And again, if you have, I know that there are a few specific questions. You might want to just email jhcreference@nehgs.org, or if you have other questions about the North Shore collections, anything that we showed today, or maybe something that we didn't talk about that you think we may have in our collection, or if you need help accessing these materials online, you can email us once again at jhcreference@nehgs.org. And we do hope to open in-person research by appointment in June, so stay tuned for more information about that. But again, in the meantime, you're always welcome to access our finding aids and digitized content online. So thank you again for joining us. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback as we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings. Any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by contributions to the Jewish Heritage Center and New England Historic Genealogical Society from people all over the world. So please consider making a donation of your own to help us continue offering more free programs like this. So thank you. And I invite you to learn more about the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center on our website, jewishheritagecenter.org. And if you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center, americanancestors.org/education. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.